Did you know that in 1990, James Edward Smith, a convict in Texas who had shot a man during a robbery, made the last meal request for a lump of soil? Well, that is still not the most bizarre final meal request. In general, the definition of death row is that it is a special section of any prison that houses inmates who are awaiting execution after being sentenced to death for the conviction of capital crimes. In the United States, after a person has been found guilty of a capital offense, the judge gives the jury the option of imposing a death sentence or life imprisonment without the option of parole. It is then up to a jury to decide whether to give the death sentence, which usually has to be a unanimous decision. If the jury agrees on death, the defendant will remain on death row during the appeal, if there is one, and other procedures which may continue for several years. A few days before their execution, death row prisoners are usually granted the opportunity to demand one special meal. The regulations on the meal vary from continent to continent, country to country, state to state, and sometimes even prison to prison. In the United States, alcohol and cigarettes are usually not permitted. In Florida, the last meal can't be over $40, and in Oklahoma, $15 is the limit. The prison director joins the convict in Louisiana for the final, memorable meal. The prisoners often request steak, fried chicken, pizza, pasta, burgers, cakes, and pies. But every now and then, there are rather unusual and bizarre requests or some other strange circumstances connected with a convict's last meal. Before we begin, please do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These are the 5 bizarre last meal requests of death row prisoners you probably haven't heard about. Lawrence Russell Brewer was a white supremacist who already served time before being incarcerated again for violating his parole. Upon his return to prison, Brewer joined a white supremacist gang. On June 7, 1998, Brewer and 2 other gang members, John William King and Sean Allen Berry, tied African-American James Byrd behind a pickup truck and dragged him for 3 miles until his head and right arm were cut off. Brewer was remorseless about the monstrous act and was executed by lethal injection on September 21, 2011. Brewer's last meal request was a feast. Undeterred by his heinous act, he wanted to leave like a king. He demanded 2 chicken fried steaks, 3 fajitas, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger, a pound of barbecue, a meat lover's pizza, a bowl of fried okra, a pint of ice cream, and peanut butter fudge with nuts. However, there was a final twist. When Brewer got the meal, he refused to eat any of it, claiming he was not hungry. That act angered the prison officials so much that they ended the 87-year tradition of last meals in Texas. Stephen Woods was sentenced to death after a jury convicted him of the capital murders of a young drug dealer and his wife. In 2004, Woods was fighting for prisoners' rights. In late 2006, Woods was part of a hunger strike in Pulaski to oppose death row inmates' treatment. The fairness of Woods' case and punishment was highly criticized by American philosopher, cognitive scientist, historian, and political activist Noam Chomsky and the human rights group Amnesty International. Steve Woods' criminal case was reported locally and internationally. His final motion for a stay was denied on September 2, 2011. 11 days later, he was executed by lethal injection. He had a rather bizarre last meal request, which is as follows: 2 pounds of bacon, a large 4-meat pizza, 4 fried chicken breasts, 2 drinks each of Mountain Dew, Pepsi, root beer, and sweet tea, 2 pints of ice cream, 5 chicken fried steaks, 2 hamburgers with bacon, fries, a dozen garlic breadsticks with marinara on the side. Eileen Carol Wuornos was a prostitute serial killer who operated in Florida. Between 1989 and 1990, she shot and killed 7 victims. All of them were men. Eileen claimed that she was abused and used since she was a young girl and that she hated men. Even though Wuornos claimed she was assaulted by the men and that she acted in self-defense, she was sentenced to death. During her stay in prison, Wuornos granted several interviews in which her damaged mental state and delusional behavior were brought to light. She scored a 32 out of 40 on the psychopathy checklist, where a diagnosis of psychopathy is everything above 25. Wuornos spent 10 years on death row and was executed on October 9, 2002 by lethal injection. Her last meal was a simple cup of coffee, and her last words were, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back." I'll be back. In 2003, a year after Eileen's execution, a movie about her and her crimes was made. The film, titled Monster, won Charlize Theron, who portrayed Wuornos, an Oscar. On March 7, 1983, James Edward Smith killed Larry Don Rojas while robbing the Union Life Insurance Company. Smith was arrested, charged, and convicted of capital murder and was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Prior to his arrest, Smith claimed that he took part in 6 ritualistic killings where he sacrificed, beheaded, and threw a 1-year-old child off a bridge. Smith's mother, Alexine Hamilton, defended her son, insisting that he was brainwashed from practicing black magic and voodoo. For his last meal, Smith requested Raikunda dirt, which is associated with voodoo rituals. He claimed he wanted to use it to mark his body so that his soul would move on and not stay on Earth as a ghost. His request was not granted, and on June 25, 1990, authorities gave him a yogurt as his last meal. James Smith was executed on June 26, 1990, in Huntsville. Before he died, Smith warned the officials that his ghost will haunt the prison for 300 years. In 1960, Victor Harry Fager rented a room in an Iowa motel and began calling doctors from the Yellow Pages. Dr. Edward Bartels answered his call, and Fager claimed that a woman needed help. When Dr. Bartels arrived, Victor shot him in the head. A few days later, the doctor's body was found in a cornfield, and Fager was arrested while trying to sell the good doctor's car. He was charged and swiftly sentenced to death by hanging. Victor submitted an appeal, which was denied. At that point, only President John F. Kennedy could have commuted the death sentence. Iowa's then Governor Harold Hughes, a death penalty opponent, and Victor's attorney, contacted Kennedy to request clemency for Victor. Kennedy thought that the crime was so brutal that he denied their request. Victor Fager was also the last person to be executed in Iowa for the next 40 years. He was put to death at the age of 28. For his last meal, he requested for a single olive with the pit in it. Photographer Harry Hargreaves aptly expressed the strangeness of this request. It's just such a polarizing image. We think about last meals, and it is something that's going to be totally gluttonous, and then he just has a single olive. You know, it's so simple, beautiful, and kind of final. It's like a full stop at the end of his life. There is our list. And isn't it a weird list, really? I think it must be a difficult question to answer, knowing your time is up and you must choose one meal to sum up your final experiences. The thought that you might choose the wrong meal must be daunting. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. Also, we would appreciate it if you could leave a comment in the comments section below about who you think had the most bizarre last meal request on death row. It is okay if you don't agree with the list. And finally, if you were on death row, what would your last meal request be?